Hello, my name's Ben.
And my name's Josh.
And welcome back to FPL Graduates, and welcome back to another video where we're going to be talking through a potential wildcard team, a wildcard draft for this week. So feel free to have a look through and let us know if you're thinking of wildcarding this week.
Okay, so we're going to do this all live so you can see what we're thinking and basically our live thoughts. I'm sure there'll be some disagreement between me and Ben as to who we're going to have in here, but we'll come to a conclusion in the end. So bear with us. So starting off in first, we're going to go with Erling Haaland. Seeing a lot of drafts without him at the moment, and I think it's absolutely ludicrous. If he scored twice at the weekend or even once, I don't think anyone's even questioning whether they should have Erling Haaland in a wild card. So it's a bit of recency bias there with those going without, in my opinion. What's your thoughts, Ben?
So I agree with Josh there. I think it is a bit of recency bias with that. Haaland still has more XG than nearly a quarter of the teams in the Premier League. So I wouldn't be looking to get rid of him. I think, again, the only reason that I'd be looking to sell him is if he's injured or if Manchester City had a blank game week.
Yeah, definitely agree. And then who else would you have in this team, Ben, like as a non-negotiable?
As a non-negotiable, I think for me, it's probably Heung-min Son as a non-negotiable. He's in purple patch of form, which we all know he gets all of his goals within a 6-week span of any Premier League season, and he's in that form right now. So I'd probably look at have Son in there. For me, it's still great value at 9.2 million. So I've got no complaints about that. So for me, Son's got to be in there.
Yeah, I agree with that one. And then I think in goal as well, Areola at 4.1. He's 4.2 now if you happen to buy him outright. But he's probably one of the better goalkeepers that you can get. Obviously, the second highest scoring at the moment. So for value for money, it's as good as it's going to get. Would you agree with that, Ben?
Yeah, definitely. And I'd also be considering just sort of keeping it cheap with the keepers and potentially going with someone even like Matt Turner in goal, because with this wildcard draft, at this current state of play, you're not going to have too much budget to play around with. So I'd keep it cheap and cheerful on the keepers. The points have been sort of few and far between for the keepers so far this season. So I'd maybe look at keeping it cheap and lessening the risk associated with those keepers.
Yeah, definitely, especially with like the amount of premium assets that we're going to be probably including in this draft. I think keeping it cheap pretty much anywhere that you can is probably the best bet at the moment. Someone else we're going to discuss, Mo Salah, Ben. Would you have him in your FPL draft right now?
Yeah, I'd probably look at having him on my wildcard team right now. Liverpool's fixtures look great and he looks great as well. Yes, his goal threat is a little bit lower than it was last season. However, his assist potential and his all-round game has massively improved. He stays out wide a bit more, creates a lot more chances, and has been very consistent in his points return so far this season. And with Liverpool's fixture swing, maybe you could argue this game week, Brighton is decent from an attacking perspective, but it certainly changes from next game week onwards. So I'd definitely look at having Mo Salah in your teams.
Yeah, 100%. So in defense, what are we going to say? Obviously, there's a lot of funds already used. Where would you look?
So I'd be looking at sort of 3 teams in particular. I'd be looking at Newcastle, Aston Villa, and Spurs in terms of your assets here, and then potentially like a £4 million defender. So someone like Kabore could be absolutely fine to own and just have sat on your bench for now. In terms of the other assets from those teams, I'd probably first of all look at probably Matty Cash as the first option. Aston Villa's fixtures are fantastic. Matty Cash is playing very attacking, could potentially play at right wing for some of these fixtures as well, and also gets rotated out for the European fixtures. So there's no worries with that, at least not for now under Unai Emery. And yeah, like I said, his goal threat is top 5 in the league. So I have no doubt at Matty Cash being sort of in my team here.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. 4.9 million. It's one of those where you need to hop on now before you get left behind. I think he's already over 20% owned as well, which is a high one. Obviously, you mentioned Kabore as well, £4 million. I don't really have a problem with that. But someone else that is even cheaper that you could potentially go with is Charlie Taylor of Burnley. I think he played in the last 3 around here. Obviously, he didn't feature in against Luton there. But he could be someone if you're looking to really sort of save the budget at 3.9. He's someone else that you could potentially go for, but I think Kabore for us for now will be probably the better pick just because we know that he's got a great attacking threat. We've seen that so far this season for Luton as well. So moving on then, we've sort of got a couple of defenders in there. Is there anyone else, Ben, in the attack that you think like we need to have them in?
Oh, it's difficult to say, really. I'd be tempted as well with someone like James Maddison, but I don't know whether you're sort of thinking along the same lines as that. I think he holds great value still at the price that he's at. What do you think, Josh?
He does hold great value, but I think it's one of those where you're going to have to not go with someone in order to fit as many assets in. Also, we haven't discussed Trippier yet. He's 6.7. Obviously, we want some sort of coverage with that Newcastle defence. Bukayo Saka as well. He's 8.7 million, so he's not cheap either. So I think there's going to have to be some sort of compromise. Who'd you say out of those three, if you had to rank them in the order of importance, 1 to 3, how would you rank those three?
It's difficult because it's more on the fact of which team do you prefer to sort of back in this situation. So I'm completely going to avoid the question and probably look at a Spurs defender instead. I think you've brought in Destiny Udogie at 4.6 million, so I think it makes sense to keep him in the team for now. If you don't own Udogie, I'd actually think Pedro Porro is a better asset to own at the price that you're paying 5 million rather than Udogie's at 4.8 now. So if you've not got either of them, Porro's attacking stats are a little bit better and he seems to be further forward. But for this particular case, Josh has already owned Udogie, so I'd probably look at going for him instead.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Porro obviously getting forward quite a lot for Spurs. He's looking decent. I'm going to not avoid the question and choose someone in the midfield instead of Bruno Fernandes. You shouldn't be having Bruno Fernandes probably at this point in the season just because of how poor United have been. I'm going to put Bukayo Saka in there. 8.7 million is quite pricey. Obviously, the fixture this week is not great, but I think Arsenal are getting to that stage where they're pretty fixture proof. I think Chelsea away is a good one. Sheffield United at home is probably one of the best ones. Newcastle away is tough. Then you do get a decent little run going towards here. And then we're ending up near sort of the Christmas period where anything can happen. Injury or not, I think he plays pretty much all the time. So yeah, it's just one thing that does put me off him is that whole penalty circus that's going on where they're giving it to Kai Havertz because it's going to boost his morale and things like that. That's what puts me off as a FPL manager. I just want him to be as selfish as possible and take every penalty that he can. But he is returning pretty much every game week right now. What did you say about Saka, Ben? Do you think he's pretty much as close to being essential as possible?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a case for keeping him in because he's just been so good for so long for Arsenal. And obviously he is a bit pricier, so you're going to have to bear that in mind when assessing other assets. But yeah, for now, I see no reason why you wouldn't sort of keep him in, even with a knock. He's probably, like I said, plays even when he's sort of seems to be injured, and he's done this over seasons as well. So it's not like the first time we've seen this happen. So yeah, happy with keeping Bukayo Saka.
Yeah, definitely. And then up top as well, Julian Alvarez. We mentioned him in our Deadline Dilemmas video. A lot of people may be looking to sell him when he's probably been arguably one of City's best players so far this season. Would you be keeping him on a wild card right now, or do you think there's better assets elsewhere?
I'd be really tempted to keep him, but it's just all dependent on if you have that extra million. If you had that extra million, which I think, it's going to be difficult to say whether we do or not at the end of this draft, I'd be tempted to go with Ollie Watkins, which almost makes me want to sort of go and say, look, maybe we should just invest in Moussa Diaby. It's a little bit of a cheaper option in that Aston Villa team. 6.7 million. It's a lot cheaper to get him and a lot more affordable to get him than Ollie Watkins. Yes, Watkins is in great form, but let's see how our team shapes up with Moussa Diaby in there as an asset. Yes, he's sort of picked up a potential knock, but we don't think it's serious at all. And we think, he should be fine to play this weekend.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on into defence, we talked about obviously Newcastle. Botman injured for game week 8. Eddie Howe said he will be back after the international break, but didn't really say game week 9. It wasn't as sort of glued down as that. I think Dan Burn at 4.5. If you've had Botman like me as well since like right at the start, when he was 4.4, you've potentially made a little bit of money in Botman as well. So you can go to the same defence with the same sort of goal involvement threat for a cheaper price as well. And he's probably more nailed at the moment just because of how sort of injury prone Botman's been to start this season. He's been out with a couple of knocks so far this season. Would you say that's a good shout, or would you prefer maybe Shah ahead of him, Ben?
I would be tempted to go Shah ahead of him just because of the additional goal threat I think Shah has, like from set pieces, from headers and that sort of thing. But I don't argue with you. I think the points potential is pretty similar on a week by week basis with them. So I'll be happy with that as well. I'm just looking sort of, we're probably at this situation not looking at holding free playing strikers. So I think we'd be happy just to retain the Mabama that we've got there at 4.3 million. And in terms of sort of the budget that we're looking at for these free players, we're looking at 18.4 million. So Josh, what are your thoughts on that? Is it sort of time to look again at another cheaper option in defence there potentially?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to. I don't think you can necessarily push to Trippier just because of how weak that would make the rest of the team. Like if we go with, say, Trippier and Alvarez, you're looking at maybe like a £4.5 million midfielder, and that's just literally like nobody really at the moment who's standing out. I think if you can get Trippier, or if you do want Trippier, you're just gonna have to make a sacrifice. Basically, you're gonna have to sacrifice someone like Saka or Son or Salah, one of those bigger guys in the midfield, in order to sort of fund that move into defence. I think Trippier is a fantastic option. It's just that he is priced so awkwardly at 6.7 at the moment that it makes it so hard. And is he going to keep up with these level of attack and returns that we've seen in the last, he's got 4 assists in the last 2 weeks, which is crazy. It's going to be an interesting one because you're going to either have to go with him or you're going to have to go without him, because it's not going to be a case where you can sort of transfer him in later down the line because it's that awkward, right?
Yeah, it's an awkward price point. And I think with the budget that you're looking at, it's just you're going to have to make sacrifices here, there, and everywhere nearly. And if you're going to want to have Haaland, Salah, Saka, Son, there's going to be sacrifices to be made. I think those guys have a really high ceiling on a very consistent basis. Whereas if Trippier's playing on the tougher teams over a longer period, you may be not as inclined to keep him, like we saw in the first few weeks of the season anyway.
Yeah, so are we going to keep Alvarez in there just because we obviously went with Diaby as our midfielder? So just sort of makes sense. And I wouldn't necessarily, a triple up on Villa is not a bad idea, I think. It's just how you can fit that into your budget. You're going to have to sort of, like we say, sacrifice someone somewhere in order to get Watkins in, and instead of Alvarez, just because that million can be used so effectively elsewhere. I think we'll go to defence first because, like we said, it's going to be probably someone a little bit cheaper. Is there anyone that you say that you need to target? Obviously, you mentioned Spurs, Newcastle, and Villa. Would you maybe double up on one of those defences, or will you look elsewhere then?
Oh, difficult. I'm almost tempted by Estepinian again, just because of the fixtures from sort of game week 10 onwards and sort of covering yourself. But it does leave the budget a bit skint at 6.5 for someone to bring in. So I don't know whether you're sort of in the same boat as me. We're thinking, is it worth going with him just to sort of bench him for a couple of weeks before starting him? I don't know there.
Yeah, it's tough because I think the main tough thing is that there's not another £4 to £4.5 million defender that sort of stands out. You're going to have to sort of find a little differential potentially even. And Estupiñán is so high owned that from game week 10, Brighton's fixtures are really, really good. We've seen the likes here: Fulham at home, Everton away, Sheffield United at home, Forest away. Even these fixtures there, Chelsea, Brentford, and Burnley, they're not even the worst in the world. So I think for me right now, I would probably keep him in there because Estupiñán at 5.1 million is probably better than most of those other midfielder assets anyway. So I think he's a good option to go for. It does leave you tight though for the midfield spot. 6.5 million is not a great price point, like 100%. Someone that we mentioned in our Deadline Dilemmas video, though, James Ward-Prowse, 6.3 million. Obviously, we only got Areola as West Ham in this team, and obviously Mobama, so it locks us out of a triple up on them. But if we skip past game week 8 and 9, from 10 onwards until probably game week 18 when they face United, which again, not the worst fixture in the world, they've got a really, really good run of decent fixtures. And obviously, he's been so important for them so far this season with set pieces, Ben. Would you say he's probably our best option, or do you think there's someone else that you'd like to go with?
I don't mind James Ward-Prowse at all as a midfield enabler. He's almost like the perfect sort of, in terms of sort of your attacking options, you got you almost, he's your perfect 7th attacker, maybe, like in terms of like who you're looking to start. And it's going to be easy to rotate between him and a potential defender on who you're starting, because there are a couple in there that I think, will he get a return? Will he not? So yeah, I really don't mind that at all for 6.3 million for a midfield enabler to enable you to get some of these better assets going forwards. Don't mind owning James Ward-Prowse here at all.
Yeah, I think there's a few other options if you wanted to sort of cheap out in midfield and build up that defence. If you're maybe looking at Trippier as well, obviously Gordon, I think still is a good option. I know he's obviously suspended for game week 8, but after that, Palace at home, Wolves away, Bournemouth, Everton a little bit later on. I think he's a decent asset, and he's proven that he's probably the first choice player in that sort of wing of the attack for Newcastle. Obviously, we discussed Neto before. Brighton midfielders, would you be? Obviously, we're saying about a Stupinan, obviously maybe bench for the next 2 weeks. I think Brighton can score against anyone, but do you think that they're worth the risks? Obviously, there's a lot of rotation in that Brighton team, aren't there?
I think it's only worth having one of them for a wild card for the next couple of game weeks. If you're looking to save sort of on a transfer down the line, having one of them is absolutely fine. But I think a double up is a little bit risky, especially for the next 2 games. We've seen how many injuries we've got over international breaks previously, and that could very well happen again. And a lot of Brighton's team travel quite a distance for their international break, and we saw rotation after that as well. So it's worth bearing that in mind. The risk associated with sort of having a couple of Brighton players in there and the benching them for a couple of weeks, you could end up needing them and they could end up being benched. So it's a risk there. I'd maybe wait until game 10 to at least double up on them.
Yeah, 100%. So that sort of wraps up our wildcard draft. I think for game week 8, you'd be looking at starting Areola over Turner. And then obviously a back 3, it would be in like a 3-5-2 of Burn, Cash, and a Doji with benching a Stupinan for this week. Obviously, I think they've got Liverpool at home this week. And then Saka, Salah, Diaby, Ward-Prowse and Son as your midfield with Alvarez and Haaland, obviously in that Manchester City versus Arsenal game. If you're sort of avoiding Arsenal and Man City assets, Ben, should they be avoiding them just for that one fixture, or should even then just sort of wait for your wild card for the next week if you don't want to avoid them sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be more than happy to sort of wait an extra week for my wild card. I'm in a pretty poor position myself in terms of my team, but I'm just willing to wait one more week just because wild card on a week before an international break just doesn't sit right with me. I know that sort of what can happen in an international break, various injuries can pop up. We didn't see many in the last one, but doesn't mean that that's not going to happen this time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So that wraps it up. If you did enjoy the video, make sure you drop it a like, share it with your friends if they need help with their wildcard draft as well. And that's it, Ben.
Yeah, and as always, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I've been Ben.
I've been Josh.
And we'll see you guys
later. Have a good game week, everyone.